Hi, it's Debbie and Caitlyn back for another episode of Dating at Her Age. I've seen a lot of dating advice, Caitlyn, on social media, and the timeline goes something like this. 3 months, it's time to start deciding if you're in a committed relationship with somebody. And at 6 months, it's time to start discussing moving in together. Really? I'm not sure that there aren't some, I want to just say the Debbie Downer moment is legal ramifications for moving in with somebody. And so talking to our legal analyst here at KSL News Radio, Greg Skordas, who's been a longtime attorney in Utah, to flush this out was really fascinating to me. We are going to learn a lot from Greg.
Yeah, and I have a lot of questions as well because I see people do this all the time at my age, people just moving in with each other when they're in a relationship. And I'm just like, that might not work out well. But I understand parts as to why they do it. One, it's impossible to afford places by yourself. I wouldn't say impossible. It's very difficult to have a one-bedroom apartment. So if you have somebody that you're kind of doing life with a little bit, it makes sense to do it financially. However, you say 6 months. 6 months scares me. I don't think I would want to move in with somebody that quickly. That maybe that's not
for
fast.
Emotional reasons.
For all of the above.
Don't really know them
I
that
just
well.
don't feel like. I mean, maybe you do, but 6 months. I would say a year is when I would actually start thinking about that. If it was making sense, if we could make it through all the seasons, then maybe we could live together. I'm not opposed to moving in before marriage. I think I'm more on like a engaged and then move in, but it's just more because I think that you don't necessarily know someone until you see all the sides of them, and you can see that when you move in with someone. But I don't think you should do it prematurely because I've seen it go wrong so many times, and everybody ends up just going back home, and so there's a lot of problems that can come with it.
So to me, there's just a lot of unanswered questions, and the emotional aspect of it to me is different than the legal aspect of it. When I hear so much advice on social media apps about at 6 months you should consider moving in together, I also wonder, what is the potential for legal pitfalls? Do you both sign a lease if you move into an apartment? If you move into one person's home that they own or the other person's home, how does that look? What if the person who moved in decides not to pay? Then do you have to go through some sort of an eviction process? I just think there's a lot more to think about than the emotional aspect. Oh, we're in love. Let's be together more. Wouldn't it be so cool to just hang out on the sofa and watch Netflix all night long and neither one of us has to go home because we're home together? Mm-hmm. That's why I love Greg Skordas, our legal analyst, because he really tells it like it is.
I also want to point out that you definitely think about this a little differently than I do, and that's just, our different age experiences is you're a homeowner, and people you may be dating are also homeowners, may or may not be. Most people I know are not quite, depending on the situation. The housing market has not been great for us. So we're just looking at we can rent a place together. When you're talking about someone owning the home, that's a totally different story. And I could see your reservations on that if they're moving in with you or you're moving into their own home that they own.
Yeah, somebody asked me, for example, to sell my home so we could move in together. I've got a lot to think about there.
At that point, that's where I'm like, all right, I think if we're married, we can discuss that. That's a different situation because when home ownership gets involved, I feel very differently about it. So, and I also don't know if I'd want to let somebody into my house if I was owning the house. I'd be hesitant. Maybe if I after a year and we've gone through a lot together, I don't know. To me, that seems fast too.
I think this is one of those discussions, whether you're 25 or 55 years old, it's good to look at it not only from an emotional perspective, but also a legal perspective. And that's why Greg is our go-to. So let's bring in our legal analyst here at KSL News Radio. And thanks for joining us for the Dating at Her Age podcast.
Oh, this is fun. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, Greg, you and I have known each other for 30 years. You're an attorney in Utah, a very well-known attorney. You've been a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And you know a lot about leasing and landlords and all that other stuff that goes in with, moving in together or renting a space. So, when we're in love, I think sometimes, we can see things through rose-colored glasses and we don't recognize some of the legal problems that could arise from moving in together. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's right. And I'm KSL Legal Analyst. I'm not love analyst. But I see this because I'm an attorney and because I'm a judge in small claims court at night. And when you see relationships go south, you realize the legal ramifications of it. And you're right. It's hard when you're in love with somebody to say, oh, let's move in, but I need you to sign an agreement. It's hard. Like when you get married, hey, I love you so much. Can we draft a prenuptial agreement? I mean, those things are awkward. And I think that people, it'd be nice to look back and have hindsight every time. But it would be so much easier for people when they do break up to have something written, to have something put together so that there's an understanding on what's going to happen. Often it involves lease agreements and just the financial considerations. So let's say you've already got an apartment and somebody moves in and they say, hey, I'll help you with the rent, or I'll go, I'll sign the lease agreement with you. And then suddenly things break up. Well, the landlord's still looking at the rent agreement and they've got both your names on it. So the landlord doesn't care if you break up. You're still on the hook, even if you break up and even if you move out. What do you do about personal property? Well, we bought this painting together. Well, we're not friends anymore. What do we do with the painting? What do we do with the dog? So you'd be surprised how many people end up in court over who's going to get Fluffy. You know what I mean? But you don't think about that when you're dating, when you're in love, because you don't want to think about what could happen. And that's the problem that we have. And I'm an attorney. I didn't draft a prenup. You know what I mean? So do as I say, not as I do. But that's kind of how it works.
So I think that everything you just said is something, even just in a friendship, just a roommate, you can experience that, but a relationship can just be much more intense. What advice would you give someone about going about bringing that conversation up? How would you approach it? So I don't know if someone is willing to talk about it, or I don't know. How would you bring that up?
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with the conversation about shall we move in? Because if you say, shall we move in, you should also say, and what does that look like financially? And what happens if we don't want to live together anymore? Who's going to be responsible for what? So I think that it's helpful in a dating relationship, no matter how committed you are, no matter how crazy you are about each other, to say, let's at least have an understanding. You want to move in? Okay, I think that's a great idea, but this is my place. And I've been here for a while. And if you move in and we break up, you need to move out. We're not going to have this dispute about whose house it is because it's mine and I own it. That's where people get in trouble, is suddenly they break up and the one party says, well, I've been there for 6 months and I've been helping out with the rent, or I've been helping out with the house payments or something. Maybe I have some interests. Maybe I have some. Who's to say it's your house any more than mine? Or who's to say the equity that's increased while I've lived here isn't partly mine?
That happened to a friend of mine, actually, where they weren't married. They were living together for a number of years, and then they split up. And then one party said, oh, I think I might be, legally entitled to some of your equity in the home, even though he owned the home, and he had purchased the home. And I think that there was a wake-up call that they had been together for a while. She had been contributing to the household in some one way or another. I don't know the specifics of that. But that was also a wake-up call for me down the road, because I'm also a homeowner. And, if a man says, hey, shall we live together? I mean, it could be that he would want to move in with me. Now, having had this experience in the past, I wouldn't fall for that again or go in that direction again. But let's start with this point. Like, if somebody has lived there for a long time, you aren't married, they move out, you break up, do they have any sort of legal standing to get a portion of your equity?
I would say generally no. I mean, that doesn't work necessarily that way. It could, if they lived there for a significant period of time,
like
and
10
if they
or 20 years,
and they contributed significantly to the mortgage or to the payments or whatever. Let's say you own your home, and you do, and somebody moves in with you. Yeah, I mean, they're helping you, so there's an expectation on their part that, hey, I'm helping this person pay their mortgage. I'm helping them gain some equity. Maybe I should get something in return, and maybe you can work something out. I mean, it's easy to, like I say, to look back, but you can say, look, my house is worth $500,000 today. Let's move in. And if you break up in a year and it's worth $550,000, maybe they are entitled to $25,000, half of the increased equity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you can set a baseline perhaps when you move in. And I know that's awkward because we don't want to be drafting contracts when we're dating. But boy, it would sure save you a lot of grief down the road because dating relationships don't always end well.
Well, that's what I was saying. So it's like from love to lease. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're so in love, and we're in love with the idea of being closer and being together more often, and that we don't have to cut across town to go see each other, that we forget that a lease might be an important contract to sign. So both parties understand how much is going to be paid in rent to whoever, the landlord is going to be in that scenario, when the payments are going to be made, how the utilities are going to be split up. In my experiences, if these relationships don't end well, then if you don't have a lease agreement in place, how do you get this person out of your home? So let's start there. I mean, how do lease agreements, even when you're in love, protect you?
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about it just in terms of cases that I've seen. At that point, it becomes almost like an eviction, just like anything else. Somebody's in your house and they're not there, and they're not getting along anymore. You can't both live under the same roof. And you've had the house for some time. You've been buying the house. You're purchasing it. Some people think, well, I need to have a lease agreement. I need to have this or that. You can have it in a text message. You know what I mean? You can have an understanding between two parties via email or on a little love note. I understand I'm moving into the house. I'm not contributing to your equity. And if things go badly, I'll move out and I won't have any expectation. It could be that simple. And a judge would almost certainly find that to be a valid and binding contract. So, I don't think you need to go see a lawyer and have some big agreement drafted. If somebody's moving into your house, put something in writing, even if it's something as simple as a text message that says, you're going to help me with my payments. We're going to call that rent. We're going to call that rent, and not something that necessarily gives you a right to the increased equity in my home. And I think something like that would withstand a legal scrutiny. Something as simple as that would save people so much time and effort. Also, something like you talk about with somebody moving out. If we decide to break up, this is my house. I owned it before you moved in, and you'll be the one that moves out. I know that doesn't sound all that romantic at the time, but boy, it sure saves you some problems down the road.
Well, it just takes a level. It just means move in with someone who's mature to have that conversation, it seems like. But I didn't even realize that you could just have a text exchange, and that would help you out in the long run.
A text exchange you save.
That you save, yeah.
But that you save, right. It's probably better if you have something written down. But people don't realize that text messages are writings,
Yeah.
Emails are writings. And the fact that you wrote it on a text that you save, you better be able to find it, is no less legal than something you write up yourselves. So I think something like that. You've got to have an understanding so that when you go back and you say, well, I said this and she said that, and then it becomes who's telling the truth. And no judge or finder wants to decide who's telling the truth. So just write it down. We're buying this refrigerator together. My house needs a new refrigerator. We're buying it together. I'm going to consider that part of your rent. And if we break up or anything happens, it's still my refrigerator. Something that simple would be binding.
Well, I think it brings clarity, too, when you write it down. And I would prefer, just personally, to even print a lease agreement for free off of the internet.
For people who aren't thinking that far in advance,
and they're easy to get. You can get it on the internet. It's so easy. Yep.
They're easy. They're very clear.
You can just get lease agreements on the... See, these are things I have no idea about. I am way naive on this situation, but you can just print your own and figure that out.
Because the big issues start to come up financially with somebody when they move in, and then they decide that there wasn't clarity on when, quote unquote, rent was due, and they push the goalpost back, and maybe months go by, and there's one person in the relationship who's footing the bills for everything, and the other person is like, I'll get you later, I'll catch you later, I'll get you later. This can become a real financial drain on somebody. It's almost, in my view, like having another child, where you've now been thrust into a situation where you're so in love with somebody, but you find that suddenly, because they moved in, you're financially supporting them.
Right.
And that's why I feel like having it in writing, having a signed lease agreement, I would go beyond. This is my personal just my personal take, I would go beyond text messages and emails. I think those things kind of get lost. I would have a copy in a fireproof safe, just in case, Greg.
Sure.
But you're the lawyer, I'm not.
But
Maybe
I'm just
that's
saying
over the
something
top.
is better than nothing.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Something that confirms the understanding is better. Obviously, a lease agreement is great. Obviously, having a lawyer draft something is great. But those are just awkward things to do when you're in love. Hey, I love you. I want you to move in with me. Sign here on page 7. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I think if they say no, though, I would look at that as a red flag. If they say no to that and then they want to move into my home and there's no understanding of who pays for what and when payments are due, I would look at that as a red flag.
What I see more often than that is, yes, I'll sign it. Oh, yeah, I'll get to that. Oh, yeah, let me sign it. Oh, let me put it together. And pretty soon you're 2 years later and it hasn't been signed, and you can say, well, we agreed to this. He agreed to sign it. He promised he would sign it, but he never did. How are you going to prove that? So, yeah, something is better than nothing.
So if there is nothing actually signed or there's no formal lease agreement, I mean, other than maybe a few texts, like, are you just kind of helpless at that point?
Well, I think then a judge, let's say you ended up in small claims court or something like that, would just look at the equities of it and just look at what really happened and try to decide. But you don't want to go to court. You don't want to, I mean, who wants to do that with somebody you formerly were friendly with and you loved? I mean, I'm because if you have a judge decide, sometimes he or she ends up flipping a coin in some respects, and somebody's not very happy. So if you draft it at the beginning, you're both equally, at least whether you're happy or not, at least you're both have a clear understanding as to what's going to happen if something goes bad with our relationship.
Straight ahead, Greg is going to tell us about a situation that he sees that's a little too frequent, actually, for comfort, and that is when the person who owns the home loses access to their home. That's next.
I'll tell you another thing that is really problematic that I've seen far too often is when people move in together. Let's say that Debbie, you own a house and you've been buying it for years and somebody moves in with you. And then there's a squabble between the two of you, a fight. Let's say it gets something more than just pushing. And he gets a restraining order from you, restraining you for coming into the house. Your house. You've had it for years. And I've seen that happen. And you're kind of going, wait a minute. I have these people call me going, it's my house. It's got all my stuff, and now I'm subject to a restraining order, so I can't even go into my own house. That's an extreme example, but I see it more than you think. And that's when somebody's going, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. And then you do almost have to seek judicial intervention when you go to the court for the protective order to say, hey, I'll stay away from her. I don't care about that, but at least let me have my house back.
So the tables get turned against the homeowner.
Absolutely, and I've seen that.
That's terrifying. I never would have thought that could happen.
Yeah, I've seen it happen, and it's the weirdest thing because I'll have people come to me and go, I've been in this house for 5 years, and I get in a fight with her, and now I can't go into my house. Or let's say you have a home office. I can't go to my office because there's a restraining order. You know what I mean? Those are extreme examples.
No, but it's
but
possible.
I've been practicing for years, Debbie, and I see these.
Wow,
people don't come to
Greg.
me when their relationship's going great. You know, nobody consults a lawyer when they're happy. When things go badly, they go, hey, what am I supposed to do?
And these are all scenarios we don't think about when we're falling in love with somebody.
Absolutely not, right.
We think we're hoping, we think it's going to be bliss.
Right.
But when things go south, then you don't have access to your home office or your clothes. Well, that just really makes my next question feel a little small in that context. I was thinking even pets.
Yep.
You know, when you move in together and they bring, I don't know, their pet donkey or something into their, or their pet chickens or their dog, and their dog destroys your yard or something like that. These are all things that you're like, and really, what are you going to do? You know, if it was a neighbor's dog that ran in your yard and dug up your sprinkler system and chewed all of the ferns down and the trees were, killed the trees, maybe you would have some what are you going to do? Sue the person who's living with you?
Yeah, the difference is that you invited the dog when you invited the man. You didn't invite the neighbor's dog. So if you're inviting someone into your home and they bring a pet and you know they're bringing a pet, you're probably not going to have much claim if the dog eats your eats your
digs up your whole yard.
Yeah, like that stuff like that just happens.
That is an interesting nuance, though.
Yeah, right.
That your neighbor's dog could, your neighbor could be liable for their
the neighbor's
dog,
dog's trespassing,
but your
boyfriend's dog's not. He's part of the household.
All of this makes me think that clearly dating and living together is going to be a lot different than what the courts would see in a divorce.
Right.
And they would view it a lot differently. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because typically dating relationships are much shorter. With a divorce and a marriage, you're looking at years together, usually. And so things do change over the course of time. The equity in your house does change over the course of time. The things you purchase together, the car that you co-signed on.
Then you're legally bound through marriage.
You become legally bound. And so then it's, where were we when we started? Where are we now? Divide by 2. That's how divorce law typically works, if I were to simplify it. But in a dating relationship, who decides how you've changed since you've been together? Who decides if you've got some increase in your equity, or if in fact the car that you co-signed on together is yours or his? I mean, those have problems too. Where you're not just dividing by 2 in a relationship. Well, hey, it's my car. It was always my car. He just co-signed because I couldn't afford it, and I've been making all the payments, and now he's saying, hey, it's half mine. You know what I mean? So in a marriage, it would be half his, because we assume that the marital couple is splitting everything and they're helping each other. But in a dating relationship, I think you can draft something up saying, hey, you're going to help me co-sign on this, but it's my car, and if we decide to break up for some reason, I'm going to keep it and all the equity that's in it.
But you don't have the same rights that you would have as a girlfriend or a boyfriend that you would have as a husband or a wife to property?
Largely, they are the same. But they're not treated the same because the time period isn't the same. We often think of a marriage as going longer. I mean, we don't really recognize common law marriage. I mean, certainly you can have some situation where you're together so long, a judge will say, look, I'm just going to treat you guys as married and divide everything as I would if you were a married couple. But short-term, a year or less relationships, I think you just go back to where you were before you started the relationship. I think that's how most judges would see something like that.
Just a question. So say I move in with someone and it's either into their house and I do sign a lease, or we sign a lease together, but then I want to get out of that lease. How easy is that for you to do, or do you just have to sell it off? Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, I mean, then you're just treated like a landlord-tenant. Like if you take out the relationship part of it, and you're a tenant. And you're bound by the lease as any other tenant. So if you have a relationship with somebody, you want to move in with them, and they have you sign a lease agreement, you're bound by the lease. Now, if you break up, it's not like the landlord. It's not like you're breaking the lease. They're effectively evicting you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, I don't want you in my house anymore. Well, then you're not responsible for the lease.
Yeah.
Because
they want you out.
Then it's the landlord's decision to break the lease, not yours.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you see a lot of these end up in court, Greg?
No, it's not as often as you think, because most people just sort of work things out. I mean, certainly there are a lot of divorces. I mean, I think half of all marriages end in divorce. But in these dating relationships, I think most people are smart enough and have at least some level of...
You'd think so.
Yeah, I know. They can end badly on a number of levels. But, it really takes some anger, some hatred to want to hurt somebody on your way out the door and want to hurt them financially. And we see that, but you would hope that more people, and I haven't answered your question, but it seems like more people do just decide, hey, this didn't work out. Let's just both go our own way and, let me get my stuff out of your house.
If I were to come to you and say, hey, and I know what your answer is going to be, because I've called you about my dating life in the past, and your advice is stop dating.
I know.
Just stop dating. I don't know why you're doing this. But if I were to come to you and say, hey, there's this man I met, we've been dating for a while, he's, it seems like we're getting along, he wants to move into my place, what would your advice be?
I mean, be careful. I would just say, make sure you and he have a clear understanding on what it means for him to live there. Now, you've had your place for a while. I know that.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that it's your place when the relationship ends. And if it doesn't end and you live happily ever after, that's great. But I would just have a clear understanding that this is my place. You're going to help. You're going to pay some rent. You're not going to pay the mortgage. You're not going to increase my equity in a sense that you're going to get something out of it. You're going to stay here and you're going to pay me rent, however you want to phrase it. But if you decide you don't like me anymore, I get my house. I still have my house and all my equity. I think you could put something together that says that. Now we're going to split the utilities. You're going to help me with the phone bill, we don't do phone bills anymore. You're going to help me with the gas and the electric and that type of thing. Those are fine, but that doesn't necessarily give us somebody an equitable interest in your home.
What happens, and I know a lot of this because I was a landlord legitimately. I had some rental properties for a while, so I learned a lot about leases and the law regarding this. But let's say you do move somebody into your home, your lover moves in, and they do something like, light a fire by accident when they're, frying eggs, now there's a grease fire and some of the, kitchen gets destroyed. Where does that land? I think about tenant insurance or whatever they call it, that a lot of people who rent will carry. Maybe you have that, Caitlyn. I know you've been.
I do. Yeah.
Tenant insurance. And there's homeowners insurance that covers it. Well, but my homeowner's insurance doesn't know there's a dude living with me. I mean, and they find out that he burned down half my kitchen. I just don't. I'm just curious to know, how does that shake out?
Yeah.
When somebody's living under your roof and they even, accidentally destroy part of your home.
Yeah. I mean, your homeowner's insurance might have a provision that says we're not covering tenants.
So look at your homeowner's insurance.
Anything like that. But that's probably where I'd go first. I mean, what I see more often than what you're describing, which is the accidental injury, is the person who on their way out the door, when they break up, puts their fist through your door. You know what I mean? Or destroys your light fixtures.
Something like that.
Then you could just sue them for the financial loss. Yeah, and I mean, most people, when the relationship goes badly, just want to be done. I mean, suing them means you got to go see them again. You got to go to court. You got to sit across the table from them, and you've got to both articulate your positions for the judge. And most people just end up eating the problems that their former lover created.
Maybe I'm too careful.
I think you're smart.
Well, I look at all this advice that I see on different dating platforms, and like I said, the timeline is after 3 months you should be talking about being in a committed relationship. After 6 months to a year, you should be talking about moving in together. And there's no follow up with that. There's some legal things surrounding moving in together that we just don't talk about in the dating world.
But those numbers are helpful for the legal part of it. Those things do make sense legally, because then you've made a decision that took some time, that both sides sort of walked into. I mean, if you meet somebody on Saturday and Sunday you're living together, then you're making a mistake.
It's like you're staring into my soul, Greg.
Right. I know. I love you. I'm trying to help you, kid. You know what I mean? Like you don't deserve your demise, but you've sort of bought into it. But if that's really legal advice that when they say that, I mean, it's not legal advice. It's practical advice, but it also makes a tremendous amount of sense legally, because if you end up having a bad situation and you say, we dated for 3 months, we moved in together after 6 months, a judge is going to look at that and say, well, these people thought this out. They were careful. This wasn't just a boom, we fell in love. It was the greatest weekend of our lives, so we decided to move in together. They thought it out. And so they would look at both sides as having made some intelligent decisions, and they would presume that those intelligent decisions would continue after the breakup.
Do you think, just based off of what you've seen with them saying 6 months to a year, do you think that that's an appropriate time of being in a relationship with someone, that it is possible to move in together? I know every relationship is different, but just have you seen, I don't know, longer times with that or shorter amounts of time? What do you think is like the happy space?
Yeah, I think those numbers are good. I see mostly shorter times. I see most people that don't abide by that. You said 90 days before you
get into define the relationship as a relationship.
6 months to move in.
6 months to talk about
moving in. If everybody did that, you'd see far less ugly situations.
Oh, okay.
So
I looked at it differently, but
Yeah,
I
that's
did
great.
too. I think
That's
the
great.
timelines are kind of all over the place, but
I'm
I'm just
open.
wondering if that's like a good window because I mean, I think moving in with someone after a month is a problem, but maybe 6 months to me is fast, but it's not to others. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's a sensible time, and I'm talking more as a colleague than a lawyer at that
Yeah.
point. But
You're
I
our
think
love analyst
I
now,
think-
Greg.
I'm just curious to what you
think
had seen when you deal with these situations. So
No, I think that's a very appropriate minimum time, 6 months
Is
before
your
you move in.
is your best advice to me still not to get into a relationship, not to date? Do you remember I called you one night and I said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this guy?" Because I thought maybe you had.
And sadly, I had.
yeah.
And,
And you said, "Stop dating."
stay away.
And that was several years ago. And I haven't done well in the dating world.
I haven't been alone much in my life, and so it's easy for me to say, because I think, if I was alone, I would just go be alone. But when you're young, like you two are, and you have a lot going for you, you do want someone in your life. And so I look at you, Debbie, and say, I don't want you to get hurt. That's how I look at you, like a daughter almost, like, or my little sister, or my baby sister. Like, I just don't want you to get hurt.
Yeah.
And relationships end badly, so don't date ever again. Because if you don't fall in love, you're never going to fall out of love. But that's terrible advice.
I don't know. Being single does save me a lot of peace on that front, but it also would be nice to have someone splitting the bills with me. That's
Sure,
part of
absolutely.
it. So, but I'm yeah.
I think my best solution to this is, buy homes across the street from each other.
I love that idea.
The duplex, right? Yeah.
Well, no, because
That's a little too close,
a duplex
right,
you
yeah.
can each buy each side,
Right.
and live. And I have actually knew of a couple through a friend of mine who had done that. They had bought homes side by side, and they were in a long-term relationship together and were extremely happy. She's like, I don't need to worry about what he's doing with his space, and he doesn't need to worry about what I'm doing with my space.
Yeah.
This was not a first marriage, just so you know.
One thing we haven't talked about, you just reminded me, is what if you both own a home at the outset and you say, let's move in together, and so one of you sells their home? You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Now somebody's got, they had their house, they had their equity, they had what they had going for them, but they're saying, hey, I'm going to move in with you and combine our resources. But I gave up everything. I gave up my house. I gave up so much. You know what I mean? So then you have a little bit different conversation that I think needs to be consummated in the sense that let's write something down. Let's just put this in writing. You're selling your house to move in with me, and you're doing that to help me. So I want to help you if we break up. I will make sure that you get something back out of it. You know what I mean? You sell your house and you have some equity and you say, hey, I just got $20,000 equity out of my house. Let's improve your kitchen. Let's fix up your house. And then you break up. You go, hey, well, this is my house. You said it was mine. Well, wait a minute. I gave you $20,000 for the kitchen. I think a judge is probably going to give him the $20,000 back. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because if you can create a paper trail that shows what happened, that $20,000 came from the sale of the house. It went toward your kitchen contractor. That's an expectation that you might have if you end up not being together, that you're going to get back.
So I want to just shake that up a little bit. In my mind, when we were saying that, if I ever did move in with anybody again, and I, have my home, my townhome, I would. This is just my own take. What I would prefer to do is lease my townhome to somebody else. So I would once again become a landlord. But I would be worried about selling my place, moving into somebody else's place, and then having things just not work out. Because at my age,
Right.
Greg, I'm not much younger than you are. In fact, I think we're practically the same age. You just don't know all of the unknowns, like how things are going to work out. Maybe there's extended family issues, or maybe there's some financial issues we're unaware of that you're moving into,
right.
or their kid, they're paying for their adult kids, and there's no
Right.
money there left over at the end of the month, and so you're just always in this financial, toilet bowl.
Right.
I guess maybe that makes it sound like I wouldn't want to be all in on the relationship, and I'd want to have one foot out the door, ready to go back to my townhome if need be. But you're right. When you own a home, that is an asset. I look at it and like, I may never be able to buy that same place again, the way
Sure.
the housing market is.
Right.
I would be really skittish about selling, moving in with somebody. certainly would be really nervous and would not invest in their property in terms of home improvements. I'm not going to blow out the kitchen and put a new one in just because I want, a special gas oven and they have electric or whatever, or put in a brand new bathroom. That I don't have that kind of money to throw around anyway. But on top of that, I'm thinking I'm not interested in just giving up my home, sinking more, money into his home, building up equity for him. And then what happens if the relationship ends? Where do I go?
But you're talking rationally right now. You're not in love. You're not talking about, but I love him and I do want him to have a nice kitchen. And I'm just telling you, Debbie, I mean, yes, what you're saying right now makes perfect sense. But when people fall in love, they make decisions. We all have. I'm not immune from this for 1 second, where you look back and go, boy, what was I thinking?
I could see myself doing that, going into somebody else's houses and trying to redo it and make it my own and then having nothing to show for it.
Exactly.
I could see myself doing that,
right.
Because I get in delusion all the time. So, yeah.
I mean, when you are in love, it's definitely, love is blind.
Absolutely. That's the moral of the story. Love is blind.
Well, and I think that it's just, I said this a little bit earlier, that today's housing market, rent prices are so expensive. If you're just in my state and you're just renting and, nobody owns a home, whatever, you need a roommate. So it's very easy for someone like me to be like, hey, I can't afford to rent by myself. And it's very common. And that's why I think so many people move in together. And these are just make sure you're moving in with a mature person. Because I think you offered some very good tips of just establishing that foundation. Because people are dumb sometimes. I'm dumb and I'm becoming way more paranoid now the more we do this podcast. And I just think that it's so important to write these things down. And it's reminding me of something that Shane Stewart, that we talked about in another episode. Don't sign anything ever unless you're going to marry them or you're engaged to be married. So I don't know. I'm just learning a lot from the 29-year-old listening to you guys talk. I have a lot of lessons.
And Caitlyn, when you meet a guy and you're dating him and he says, well, I ended up suing my last girlfriend, that's a red flag.
Yeah,
you might want to walk away from that.
I think so.
Well, I'm in lawsuit with my former girlfriend over the house, but I really want to move in with you. Cha-ching.
Yeah. That's hopefully I'm not ever calling you in one of these situations.
I think, Greg, you bring up a very, very important point. And as a lawyer, you see all kinds of criminal charges, and you've defended and you've prosecuted people. That when we hear something in relationships, like akin to what you just said, like, hey, how did that car repossession land for you? Whatever happened with that debt collection notice, or, I saw this notice from the IRS, or, hey, yeah, it ended so badly with my ex-girlfriend. I ended up in court suing her for everything, and I kicked her out, and it was really messy, and the cops had. These are all major red flags in love. And, we don't want to end up in the same legal spin that some of these people are ending up in.
And another reason to do what you talked about earlier, which is the 6 months. Give it 6 months. I mean, maybe you can forgive the former relationship issues that happened.
Depending on what
yes.
what the truth is.
Right. And let's give it some time. Let's see where we are. Let's see if we still feel the way we do today, 6 months from today. And if we do, let's consider moving in together. But for the meantime, let's see where this relationship goes. Let's hope that it blossoms, and then live together happily ever after. I would say this. I'm not ready to move in today.
That's a very mature conversation, which unfortunately I don't get to have those very much because I don't date or talk to very mature people. Yeah. Not necessarily that they're not mature, but they're not I've never really reached that point of someone who's really just there and wants to make that plan. And it's hard to find.
Before we wrap, Greg, speak to that. Is an age demographic an issue in this kind of thing, or do you see all different ages ending up in either small claims court or in legal struggles with their partners?
I don't know that it makes a huge difference. That's a great question. I mean, typically if you deal with an older population, especially let's say someone who's been in a number of relationships, that should tell you something. My third wife was really mean. Wait a minute. I don't know if I want to be considered as your fourth. You know what I mean? Like that. But young kids today, I mean, you're not even 30.
I know, I'm almost 30. I'm hoping once I get to 30, these conversations are a little bit more available in the relationships I find myself in, but it has not been the case. We don't even get to that point. I'm just like, do you like me? Do you want to just like hang out with me? Do you want to share your feelings with me? That's like as far as I can get.
Right.
So this would be amazing to just get to this point.
Yeah, younger people tend to be a little more Pollyanna, more hopeful, more optimistic, where older people are like, well, I've been burned before. I need to be a little more careful.
Makes sense.
I love your advice, Greg. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
When we started this conversation, we were talking about the timelines. You start dating after 3 months, and then say you it's time to start talking about moving in with each other after 6 months. And I just don't think every relationship follows that, and there shouldn't necessarily be pressure to do that. If the 6 months works for you, that's great, but 6 months might be a year to somebody else, or 2 years. I think it really depends on how well you know them and how strong your relationship is. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I would like to say, I agree with you, but I also think this way. There's not necessarily, in my view, a really great reason to move in together unless I'm married. Again, if I choose to get married again, to me, I enjoy living on my own. I even enjoyed living on my own when I was in my late teens and out on my own and through my 20s until I got married when I was 28 years old. So I think there's a lot of peace and living on my own. And I think this is a really very serious conversation that is beyond just, hey, let's live together. I'm going forward, I'm going to treat it like, where is our relationship going? Let's make some of the more profound decisions about where our relationship is going and how we are going to like legally intertwine this before either one of us talks about, because it's a sacrifice for both. If you're a homeowner or even when you're renting, you are talking about making a huge leap, in my view, into a situation where if it doesn't work out, what is the plan B? If I've sold my home, there's a lot of problems that go along with that. I'm stuck.
Stranded.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel a little stranded. If he sold his home, he may very well feel the same way. If I move into his house and I'm sinking all kinds of money into updating the kitchen of my own money out of the equity from my own home, how does that look? To me, it just gets very legally messy. And at this point in my life, I want to be very conscientious that I'm making a bigger decision for how our lives will look together, as opposed to, what is our living arrangement? And I'm not trying to downplay like the importance of having that conversation. I'm just saying, for me, I'm at the point where I'm like, I got to see and feel and know what the bigger picture is before I'm even considering anything like that. Like, to me, the conversation about living together comes long after we decide if we have a permanent future together.
Yeah, as it should. I think that that's very important, because I do think my generation takes it a lot more lightly, and they'll just be like, okay, let's move in together, let's get this apartment, and then I don't want to say they always end up breaking up, but I've seen a lot of people break up after that, and it's probably because they did it too fast. I've seen success as well. Like, it's not every situation.
What I was most surprised about in our conversation with Greg is he said he wishes people would wait 6 months. 6 months,
and that's
people
surprising.
Are doing it much sooner.
I don't know if I've seen it that quickly. I'd have to go back in my brain and think about that, but that's surprising to me. But I could see how it happens, because 6 months seems really fast to me. And maybe I'm just a little bit more hesitant, but I can see how some people in today's day and age, with the current rent prices and everything, could jump to do that a little bit faster if they're feeling sure about someone. And hopefully it works out if they do, but I just don't think I could do that. Especially if I'm a homeowner. Like, when you talk about that, I'm like, whoa, that's not even how my mind is at, because nobody's doing that at my age, but that's a big difference to me. Next, we are going to do our Dater Hater segment, and I have a message I'm going to share about someone's situationship.
Dater Hater.
So usually we play back a Dater Hater phone call at 801-575-5599. You can leave us a message. We'll play it back on the air. This time, Caitlyn has a text message involving somebody who sent her a message about a situationship that she's found herself caught up in.
And yeah, so I'm just going to summarize this a little bit
Perfect.
because it's a little bit of a long message and it might be better for me to give a summary than just read it all. But this is about a situationship, and this is just the way of dating in my generation, because this story that she sent me is so familiar. It's what I've gone through. It's what many people have gone through. But basically, they started off as friends, and over the course of 3+ years, it kind of just turned into something more flirtatious. Never really defined, but she was spending a lot of time with him, hanging out with him multiple times a week. He even made his home kind of her home in a way because she was there so often. And at some point they traveled a lot together. His family flew her out to meet more of his extended family to California. And then she also introduced him to her family, which this is just relationship stuff, right? But they're still just dating in a situationship. There's no definition of it. They're just kind of around. And then after this, he ghosts her after they've introduced each other on the family, and then kind of pokes back in still. This is something so significant in my generation. He's still looking at her stories on Instagram, Snapchat,
so you
whatever
check your story, and
that's
see
so
who sees
common
it.
that we check. Yeah. So he's still kind of keeping tabs. He's still trying to be like, oh, I'm still here kind of. And she mentions that they were trying to, go to a wedding together after this, still trying to keep a connection. And he would kind of flake out. Sometimes he'd be there, sometimes he wouldn't. And then after a little while, she finally just decided to just move on and let it go, even though it wasn't something she wanted to do, but it was so wishy-washy and it was never actually landing. She made the decision to let it go, and now she is dating someone. I just know this. She's dating someone. She's very happy about this.
Good.
But she says in this message, that breakup hurt worse than my 8-year long-term. And I feel that so much, because you don't really get closure in these situations. You just have to make the hard decision to end it.
I think it goes beyond that. I think it's just typical human behavior, and this is just from my experience. We want what we can't have.
Yeah.
We always want what we can't have, and I have felt myself in that same spiral after a situationship. It's like, why am I so fixated on this man who truly wouldn't commit to me, who didn't want me as his girlfriend, who would not give me a direction of where he saw this relationship going, and yet I'm still thinking about him and I'm still heartbroken. And when you read that she was ghosted by him, my heart just wept, because I've been there and it hurts. And I think also this is just my experience, just analyzing myself and with the help of a therapist and how I cope with relationships. I'm always holding on to the hope, but they're not in that same spot that I am. So I am always hopeful that they're going to commit, or something, they're going to change their mind and they're going to show up with, 5 dozen roses and tell me I'm the love of their life and it's all going to be okay. We're going to be together forever. And when I lean into hope, but they're not leaning into hope, then my perception of the relationship is really off balance from where they're at. I'm not saying that happened with her situation, but just for me, I think you always want something we can't have. And hope is really where my heart always lands in situationships. It's that's how, after analyzing, why am I still so attached? Also, I just want to add one more thing, Caitlyn, and then I'll let you run with this. Is 3 years is a long time to dedicate to somebody. I was bothered at myself in the past for allowing situationships to go on far too long. So I have so much compassion for people who get into a situationship and they stay with it for years. That's a long time. And I think we have to show ourselves grace and understanding. And it's taken me a long time to get there. So I'm like, why didn't I recognize it? What did I do wrong? What was wrong with me that it didn't turn into something that was more than just this situation? That we have to show ourselves grace. It wasn't meant to be. It's just sometimes it takes us a lot longer to get to that point where we recognize that it's not meant to be and we move on. But good for her for coming to terms with it, moving on, and then finding somebody new.
I agree. And that's the hardest thing, is to let it go, because they probably would have dated if he would have gotten his commitment issues figured out, because that's really what situations are, is someone has an issue with committing. And it doesn't really even, I don't think that it means that they don't care about you and whatnot, but they just don't care enough to make it work and actually commit. And I've dealt with this. I've dealt with it longer than 3 years. And I don't know if it's really because I was like full focused on it for longer than that. I have been doing school, working, stuff like that, but it's kind of just been there. As I'm doing those things, it's never really been my priority. And once I started focusing on it and was trying to make it a priority, that's when it started to crumble. Because I was like, this has got to be done, because I'm not doing this anymore. I've figured out where my life is going, and you can join me or you can't. And it's unfortunate when they just choose. They actively choose to not have you in their life, pretty much. But this is such a common thing. It's I keep saying that, but it is.
I'm going to say something that may sound harsh, and it's more directed at me looking in the mirror. And when you said something about they don't want to commit, I have come to terms with this, is they didn't want to commit to me, because I've been in situationships that have ended, and I turn around and they're in another relationship and they've stayed in that relationship.
Yeah.
So to my experience was, it isn't always a commitment issue. It's that they didn't see something, I was missing something that was going to complete them, if you will, or they did not see themselves in a long-term committed relationship with me. There's a question that I asked in one of my relationships, and it was a pretty straightforward question, is that, what are we?
Yeah.
And it was pretty early on in the relationship. And I've talked about this in a previous podcast episode. It was a word salad of a response that I got from him. And I knew it at that moment. But do you think I said, look, I've thought about this, give it a couple of weeks to marinate or something like that, and come back and say, look, I've thought about this and I'm really ready for something that is long-term and a commitment, and I'm not interested in continuing to date around. And instead, I just kind of dealt and put up with it. And I regret doing that, and I regret doing that to myself.
Mm-hmm.
But we live and learn, and we recognize like what we would do better next time. But I think this whole idea that they're not ready to commit, yes, in some cases, but there are other cases, they're ready to commit. They're just not ready to commit to me.
Yeah, and they might not know that, because sometimes when you just don't know what you want, you put people through the ringer and it's unintentional, and then you find your person. Sometimes it's just a really hard truth that they aren't your person, and it's okay. It's really hard to accept that. Or they might just have commitment issues. Because like at my age, I think I see more of the commitment issues, because the people that I've seen in situationships, the men, they're still single. So not all though. But I do kind of think when men decide they're ready, they will go for the best thing that's in front of them, even if that's not you. Like something that's right in front of them that presents themselves right then. And it's just unfortunate that they couldn't see that in you, even if there's nothing wrong with you. By the way, if you're caught in one of these situations, it really is a them problem.
I think part of it is like I felt alone in it, because I haven't talked to my friends about it. Now we have this podcast where on social media, people will reach out to me and be like, I found myself in the same thing. So I don't feel as alone. And I think when we can have these open discussions and have a dialogue about it, it makes us realize, oh, I'm not the only one this is happening to. But I do want to add this. I want to add a message of hope. And I have left situationships, or they've left me, quite frankly. They've left me. And do I feel so much better? Yes.
Yeah.
I feel so much better. I don't wake up every day wondering, okay, what is this? Where are we going? What's he thinking? What is he going to, like, perhaps, this weekend we'll talk about it. I don't think about it anymore. And the freedom that I got from that, honestly, I've said a prayer, like, thank you that this didn't work out and I finally have some sort of resolution, whether that's by him saying, hey, I'm moving on and I'm going to go be with somebody else now, or I'm just moving on, period, or me excusing myself from the situation. It's shocking to me that I look back and think, how long was I willing to let that go on? And here I am over here now outside of it. And I feel so much better about my life.
Yeah, and I've let it go on for way longer than I was supposed to. And I think it's in part of just being ignorant and being young, because I didn't know anything different. So I was just like, okay, there's this person who likes me. He says he likes me. We hang out and all that. But it's so inconsistent. And like I said, I didn't notice it until a few years in, because my priorities were not dating. My priorities were me, and they still kind of are. But then I was like, wait, everyone's getting married. Why am I just doing this thing that's not going anywhere? But like you really do have to make that decision for yourself, to let it go. And it is probably the hardest thing you can do if you're in a situationship, because it's like letting an almost go, because it's always been an almost, and that's the hardest thing, because you can see the potential there, you can see it, it's all there. They just will not get it together, and they don't want to make you a priority, and that's what's the hardest thing and the hardest pill to swallow. But when you do let it go, and you sometimes just have to make the decision by yourself without a conversation, because the conversations you have with them will be like, no, I want to make it work, and then nothing changes the next day. You know what I mean? So I just think, from my own personal experience, letting it go and just accepting that, and however you have to do that, not questioning your worth every day, is a great reward. You don't need to be. If you are in a situation where you are confused about how they feel about you, I think it's time to evaluate that situation.
I have the value, and some would say maybe it's the misfortune of 20/20 hindsight. I'm practically 30 years older than you are, Caitlyn. And when I was your age and people would say, oh, you'll see a lot in your life, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's true. So you pointed out something, and I just want to take the liberty of being the 57-year-old in the room here, talking to the not quite 30-year-old. And even though I just said I, too, have been stuck in a relationship in my 50s, or a situationship in my 50s, I will tell you that the goals that you have and the ideas you have and the priorities that you have in your 20s will totally be reshaped by your life experiences. And in some ways, having a situationship early on, I never had one in my 20s. I just dated. We went steady. I got engaged and we got married. It doesn't mean it was any simpler. It just was different. But perhaps experiencing this in your 20s will make you more aware as you head into the next decade of your life of what a situationship is, how to red flag it, how to deal with it, how to get away from it sooner. And you won't be a 57-year-old Debbie going, how did I get stuck in a situationship?
It's because you were used to people just locking it down and making it work when you were younger. That's how it used to be. But now this is what it is. But no, I've definitely over just the last year have realized how different my priorities are and stuff, and how to identify all of this, because really my 20s were just situationship. That's all I know. That's really all that I know. And I was just like, maybe dating just isn't for me. And I kind of sometimes still think that, because it's so much of a hassle sometimes. But I know that there are people that actually want to commit out there. I know that they are there. And maybe some people will grow up, and hopefully my situationships from the past will find their people and actually commit. I wish the best for them. But it's just, I've learned a lot. And I know if someone is confusing you early on, or at least a few months in, and they don't know what they want, it's just don't waste your time with it. And rip the Band-Aid off sooner rather than later, or else you'll be like me. And so just reading this message from my friend who sent this in, I feel for you on this. But I know this is another beacon of hope. I know that she is in a relationship now with someone she met on a dating app. So there's a positive story with dating apps. But I know that she's happy, and she found someone who actually wanted to commit. So it really just, like I said, it takes buy-in on each side, and that's really all that dating is. And if you are not interested in committing, just don't be dating. That's just how I feel like. Don't hurt other people. One thing that I have learned is situationships can also turn you into red flags, because you're so used to the toxic relationship. But that is something we need to save for another episode. But they can break you down as well, because you just don't know how to date normally.
Data hater.
801-575-5599. 801-575-5599. Leave us a voicemail and we might just play it back on the air.
And make sure to follow us on all the social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, because we share updates there. And we just want to hear from all of you, because this is what makes our podcast even more relatable, to hear real voices who are listening.
All the social platforms? Yeah, you can find us at Dating at Her Age.
We'll meet you here next week. New episodes every Thursday. Oh, she's dating at her age?
No. It's called Dating at Her Age. Oh, those poor things.